you're in limbo when you arrive at the 21st Replacement Battalion. They put you up in like a 10 or 12 bay barracks, uh, and I was there for a couple of days. So there's no acclimation. You're still in your. I mean, we had to travel at that time in our dress greens, and so that's what I mean. I'm living in my dress greens and just basically shaving kit, and so they load us up in this carry-all, take us to this. I mean, if I remember right, it was a couple of 3-hour drive in that carry-all, and we just keep driving out through the woods and into these. You leave basically main highways, and you turn off onto a little blacktop side street road, and suddenly out of the pine trees you hit this admin area that looks like something they built in World War II. I never knew when they built the admin area, but it had to have been built no newer than the early 50s or something. And just kind of rough. The fencing around the admin area was rough looking. I mean, just everything looked worn. Let's put it that way. And they brought these grills out, and because they'd had a tactical evaluation, and they had aced it, which was a big deal for obviously the company commander for the battery, and passed it. And so they had gotten steaks and brought in some beer. Well, probably a lot of beer. But we got there, it was as far as the steak eating was over. But what was going on is they were taking bets on who could drink the blood out of the steak pans where they'd been raw and brought out in large stainless steel pans and then thrown on the grill, because they had some charcoal grills outside the mess hall. And there was quite the festivity going on that was still in action. And I thought, I've come to a really bad place, because things were pretty crazy. There had been a lot of beer consumed too, and as you can imagine. So now to clarify, uprange, the admin area was away from what we call downrange, which is where the Nike Herc site was. Obviously, they had a crew on duty down there, as always, on guard duty and guarding the facility. But everybody that was off was not lacking for what they needed to have a good time. But it was an isolated site, and once I got there, I found out there's not a lot of stuff other than we were 24 on, 24 off. You were going on duty or you were coming off of duty, and that's how it was 7 days a week. Yeah, there was very little. Like, I think there was a foosball table. I didn't mention this when we talked before, but there was like maybe a foosball table and a ping pong table maybe in one of the rooms. And the admin area was fairly small. There was a mess hall, a 2-story barracks. There was a communications room. And then there was, of course, the admin orderly room and the CO's office. And then they had a room that kind of doubled as both a training room if we'd have briefings from, if our intelligence briefings or whatever would be going on. But that room doubled as a theater. It was just it'd be like, if I remember right, about the size if you had a American family home with a large living room. That's about the size it was. It had some seating in it, and they were just like random seats, nothing big. But they had an open projector, and the courier, when he would go out, he'd get a film from the PX somewhere. I never know where he picked it up, but they'd bring that film, and it was usually, maybe a couple years old on a release. There was never anything new. And, whatever it'd be, 3 or 4 film canisters, and they would show a movie in the evening for anybody that was off duty. Well, they usually didn't rotate those till about every 10 days. So if you kind of looked at the movie or the show MASH, other than theirs was in a tent and ours was in a hard site, a room, it was about that way. Because after about the 3rd day, nobody went and worried about seeing the movie, because everyone had seen it by then. We called them the Water-Meinhof gang, but you're right, they're Army faction. And so we would get briefs on them. Now, I got to Germany in February of '77, so the attack you mentioned would have happened a month before I arrived. But we also had been informed of a German military concern that had been attacked, and several German soldiers had been killed, and they'd gotten some weapons and uniforms. So it was really, we were really leery about that because obviously somebody trying under subterfuge, trying to get up to the facility. But our primary responsibility was obviously the physical security of the downrange site. The and I told you this earlier that I was really it really surprised me that when you all did your Nike Air site that was underground, we were above ground. Everything there was three missile barns, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. They were separated by large earthen berms that were as high as the missile barns, and as you know, the missiles were on track, and a section of the track would can be picked up, and then the overhead door would be closed. So they laid horizontally on their movers inside the barn. The missiles did, and then they could be pushed out of the barn. But those three barns and the launchers were all inside what was called the exclusionary fence. So the exclusionary fence was deadly force applied. Anybody trying to breach the fence, anybody in there that wasn't recognizable and carrying the ID badge, you had an external clip-on badge that you had to wear when you were in the facility. That got issued to you by the limited gate guard when you first came in, and which was an MP. And so anyway, but there were fighting positions in the berms completely around the facility at each bunker sites with interlocking field of fire. They were dug back into the berms and then sandbagged, so like a bunker. Um, all the buildings in the limited area had 55-gallon drums full of sand, and then with sandbags stacked in between the drums up to the eaves of the buildings. The limited gate guard, they had a fighting position. The towers, there were three towers, and we were called tower rats by all the other GIs. But the towers had a fighting position at the base of each tower, which the towers, if I remember, right, were probably about 25 feet in height, but there was no bullet resistance up on the tower. If you could get down the narrow walkway, the steps to get to your fighting position, maybe you'd be okay. But up in that tower, you were setting duck. I mean, it was glass and basically plywood. But you were there as an early warning system, basically. And then, but your duties were you controlled everybody coming into the limited area, and then the limited area had like the ready building, where if you weren't on the towers or on your post, you we look it was like a 6 hour on, 6 hour off shift during that 24-hour period. So you would get a chance to get into the ready building, get some chow. Um, but the arms room was in the ready building. Just off of that was the communications and the entry control point for the exclusionary area, which was manned by two MPs. The communications was in that building as well. And then the MPs, you were either a red or a yellow team member, and you each had a combination, and there was a double lock system because of the nuclear weapons. And if they were going to raise and launch the missiles, they had to get the launcher keys and things like that from the safe that we kept in the exclusion gate. So each MP had to be able to open his lock to let access for that. And I was a yellow team member for that. Secret security clearance, you had to have that. We had a second lieutenant as a platoon leader for the MPs, and that was a senior ranking MP officer that was there. And then we had three squad sergeants, maybe four, and they were sergeants of the guards. Anytime your unit went down, you would have a sergeant of the guard, and he ran the arms room as well. He was the arms room procurer. Uh, and that was it. If we got heavy fog in, and if it got to where the towers couldn't see each other, then they would put what they call a fog guard out, and you'd actually go out and have to rove on foot until the fog lifted, or they could see the towers could see each other. So there was a lot of that type of activity that went on. It was always under my understanding that Hahn Air Base, which was a Phantom fighter wing base, that was our support area, and that was still about 9 or 10 clicks away from us. And so, if the flag did go up and they actually were able to launch missiles, if they emptied the three barns and it launched everything, or it became untenable, that basically either we got hit and stuff was destroyed, we were supposed to make our way to Hahn Air Base, and you know, it it would have been on foot because we had very limited amount of military vehicles assigned to the unit. If I remember right, we had a couple of Jeeps, trailers for the Jeeps, that carry all. I think there was one or two deuce and a halfs maybe, and that was about it for the motor pool. Very limited number of vehicles assigned to that unit, and then because all the any of the GIs that were married, they had to live on the economy if they had their family with them. There was no housing there for us, and they had few people had cars, POVs, privately owned vehicles on that, but very limited transportation ability. But yes, we would make our way back and then be reassigned. But when we get intel briefings, if the flag went up, we were told 72 hours, 100% casualty is what they expected. Now they had what they called back then, they referred to it as reforger, return of forces to Europe, and they had prepositioned equipment. And I was there for a couple of reforgers. I actually helped serve through two of them when I went to the 212th MP company that was part of the 3rd Infantry Division. And that was a large operation. They would bring back, like one year, I remember the 1st Infantry Division was there, and all that prepositioned equipment, everything from Jeeps to tanks, was prepositioned in large warehouses. So if they could get to them, they just had to put the batteries in, and they had equipment there. They didn't have to ship everything over. Obviously, young GIs, and that's why you send young people, I guess, because older you would be a little more cautious. But um, I I just kind of looked at it that that's why we were there, and I actually believed, like most people probably would have, that somebody else will maybe get it, but I'll make it. And you know, and I know that's a false bravado, obviously, but I think that as a unit, I never remember anybody um, saying anything about it. And a lot of our more senior NCOs were Vietnam veterans. They had been in combat in Vietnam, and various units. I mean, the guys who obviously had their combat patches on their BDUs and their uniforms. I remember one sergeant who said that they can tell me that, but he said when we ride out of here and the reforger takes effect, in other words, all the reinforcements come, he said, I'm going to be here still. But the guys all said that any time they talked to somebody, they thought that it was a prison system for insane GIs, is what the downrange area was. But we had a battalion intelligence officer. He was a captain, and I can't remember his name now, but he was kind of famous because in the battalion, of course, you'd have had 4 batteries, and but everything was separated. Like our radar tracking installation, it was a couple of clicks away from the main area, so that radar site was well removed from where the downrange area was. And so anyway, stuff was spread out like that. But there was a lot of history of him trying to come and catch, like, dark 30 hours, seeing if the limited gate guard is awake and alert. And then if he thought he would catch you, they would climb the fence and try to catch you, not alert. But, again, remember, on the exclusionary fence, we had rules of engagement was deadly force. So I never heard of him touching the exclusionary fence, but there was always that thing of him trying to sneak up and catch you. And I don't know what would happen to you. Obviously, it had been an Article 15. You'd have been busted and maybe turned into some, a clerk somewhere and nowhere in the middle of North Korea or something. The missile barns had an ADT alarm system on the walk-in, the personnel doors, and the overhead doors. So if then that alarm went into the exclusionary gate where the two MPs were stationed. So if you had an alarm go off, you had to send two guys. Everything was a two-man rule because of the nukes. And you'd have to send two guys to check the alarm. And if you couldn't get the alarm to reset, we had access to keys to open the personnel door and get into the barns. So, but if you couldn't get the alarm to reset, you had to actually physically guard that barn. And of course, Germany, we had, well, if you remember in history, the 77 winter in the States through the Midwest was a really bad winter. And so we had a pretty bad winter through 77, even in Germany, cold, snowy. And they kept the missiles warm, heat to the barns. And, but tell you that the nukes felt warm when you got up against them, the warhead. And you could get up and lean against the nukes and get warmed up, on a cold day when you're standing barn guard. But I remember there was a staff sergeant, and I thought he was a crusty old guy. Of course, he's probably only in his late 20s or early 30s. But you know how it is when you're 18 and the guy's been in the military for maybe 12 or 15 years. He looks a lot older. But he was a section chief for one of I can't remember now, Alpha, Bravo, or Charlie Barnes, but he was a lifer. He was going to be a lifer in the Army, but they would have trouble once in a while with the launchers raising if they put the missiles on to raise the launchers. And he always carried a section of copper wiring with each end bared on it. And he said, one day I saw him and I was like, what do you got that copper wire for, Sergeant? He goes, that's my jumper wire. He said, if the launchers don't want to go up right, I can stick this in wherever. And he said, I can bypass it and make it raise. So, ingenuity. I mean, GIs, that's how they are. But I bring that up because you sent me that video of that 1958 where they were looking at the weapons. And toward the end of that video, that's a Nike Herc on a launcher being raised. And it went up about, like 8 or 9 feet and stopped. And I saw a GI running to try to do something, like it wasn't working right. Like they were running to fix it. And I was like, I bet he's going to go get his jumper wire. Got shipped, transferred from after I'd been at the Nike Herc unit for about a year, a little over a year. I got orders to go to what they would call as a garrison or white hat unit, which was the 212th MP company, but they were assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne. And that Leighton Barracks was in Würzburg, Federal Republic of Germany. But they would send you up for training. If you'd come from a Nike Herc site, they basically retrained you because you had been physical security, and things were totally different when you went to, basically into an infantry unit like the 3rd Infantry. So for that period, that retraining period, I was up along the East-West German border for a short period of time during that. And they took us to a village that had been cut in 47. There was I remember kind of a small creek that ran through the village, and there were bridges, and the bridges had been destroyed over the creek. And then on the one side, obviously, the Russians in 47 took the portion of the village they wanted, and the West German side was predominantly just residential area of that village. And we were told, and I remember this, that there was some type of leather goods production or tanning or manufacturing on the side that they took. And but yes, the border, the way it was designed, there was a wire mesh layered, like a shingle layered fence. and then there was a kill zone of approximately 50 meters, and then there was a concrete wall that had what would be best described as a concrete culvert laid on top of it, so it's rounded. And then they would put large chunks of broken glass embedded in the concrete on top of that rounded culvert type structure on top of that concrete wall. So if you did it, actually have an opportunity, and it was fairly high, but if you got your hands on it, you couldn't get any way to grip. You would be lacerated severely and couldn't climb over that concrete wall. But the layered fence, heavy wired fence, was designed in such a way that there were anti-personnel mines strung on that fence at intervals, and the tower guards could set off a section of the fence if they needed to command detonate the mines. At least in that area that I saw, that's how it was laid out. Um, so, but it was nothing had been painted since 47 on the East German side of that poor village. I mean, it was totally devoid of any color. The people that you could see walking, you could see them walking on the street over there. Um, Dark gray or black type clothing, no color in the clothing, no cars. Um, just like if you'd sucked all the soul and life out of that area, that would be the best way to describe it. But if you did a 180 degrees about face, the West German village, the houses were painted. There were cars in the driveways. There were cars on the street. There were flower boxes at the houses. There was gardens in the yards. It was night and day difference, and that's when I totally understood communism sucks everything out of a nation and out of a people and out of a country that it can, and destroys them. So very, very telling on that village.